and we'll go to, I have Visual Studio already. We'll just regular console project. I'll call it tip calculator. And I'll do OK. I will later, I mean, this is actually a nice program to do in a form, because you could have check boxes for what percent of tip you want, and then a text box for other. And I usually use it as my first Android exercise when I try Android. All right. So we have the main. Again, the class program, and then the main. The ideal way that you should use the main is it should only have a call to the starting point. It should call the first method that you need, or it should call the class that you need. And it really shouldn't do anything else, because that's what this is all about, is just starting the program. All right. But let's, up the top, I'm going to do some comments first. What is involved in calculating a tip? I'm going to do like a multi-line comment here. What's involved? What are the things that we have to do? Right, we need to get the amount of the bill. What else do we need to do? Right, get the tip percent. Okay. What next? I'm doing this for a reason, not just to because when you're doing this programs, one of the things is, how do you know what methods to do?
The tax.
Yeah, we need to maybe calculate the tax. I'm going to assume, I'm going to just put the tax in, calculate. I'm going to just put the tax in as a constant, although you could use it as you could get it, right? Because it's different in different places, so you might want to just so should we just get the tax? You want to do that? Well, let's see what you do. Okay, so let's say get the tax. Whoops. I will need that many lines probably, but. So this is all input, right? We talked about input, and then you do your algorithm or your processing, and then you do your outputs. So I think we've got all the stuff in we need. What would be the calculations that we need to do? I don't need the math, just in words. So you need to, I'll do what? You need to calculate the tax, right? You need to calculate the tip given the percent, right? And then you need to total it all, get the total. And then the last steps would be, to display probably the amount, the tax, and the total. I would probably do that all together, although you could have doing a separate methods, I suppose. Now, one of the reasons why I listed, this is basically the steps you need to do, right? So it's kind of like the algorithm or the pattern. Ideally, since a method should do one thing, basically each one of these translates into a method. So if you think through a program and you think through what the steps, that's where you start, you start to think, well, each step is probably a method. All right, because each step is one thing for it to do. Does that make sense? As I said before, and I will, because a lot of people complain at this stage, but this is a whole lot more work than just doing it in main, and it is. But as I said, it's developing habits for when you get into more complex situations. All right, so let's get the amount of, a couple of other things that I may do up here. So this is a comment at the beginning. I'm going to just declare tax. We said we're going to get the tax, so never mind with that. The only thing that I might declare at the top, we talked about scope. What would you declare at the top? before I say what I would do. Something that you want to use in all much. There's only one thing I can think of that I would do that for. I know it's early and the coffee's missing, but any ideas?
You have to set your data type.
Well, you do have to do that. And I would probably do like a double. I would probably do the amount. I would probably declare the amount at class scope, because every calculation that we do uses amount, right? To get the tax, you take the amount times the tax percent. To get the tip, you take the tip percent times the amount. The amount is in almost every method. So you can pass it down. And there's some arguments that might in the end be better, but I think because it's used in just about all the methods, I would declare it up there so I don't have to worry about it. Does that make sense?
So you don't need to set it to 0?
I do not here. It's not a bad habit to set it to 0. So the reason why I don't have to set it to 0 is that the very first thing I'll probably do is get an amount to assign to it. If you're going to use it inside of a loop, or if you're going to use it inside of like a for next or something, sometimes it requires. It'll tell you of that. It'll say you're trying to use an uninitialized variable. So it's not a bad habit. It saves you that error if you do have it. So we can make this. What kind of method type do you think? What return type would it be when we get the amount? I know I'm asking you to think too early, but I think we actually could just make it void, because we've set it up at top. If we change the amount, we don't have to pass it on, so we don't have to return a value because it'll be reset, right? Because it has class scope. So I'm going to just call it get amount, and it won't take any arguments. Now, if you wanted to, I'm not going to do this probably this time, but you can do something like private or public here. It's really not relevant when we're only using one class. It really becomes only relevant when we're have classes talking to each other. Private means no other class can see it. That's an optional keyword I just wanted to show you, and we'll talk more about it later. But you can actually get by with just saying void in this instance. It has a default status, which is neither private nor public. Actually, it's protected. Protected means it can only be seen by, this won't mean nothing to you. It can only be seen by this class and its children. So it's an inheritance thing, but we won't worry about that right now. So that's its default. So in here, I'm just going to do the same stuff. Everything you've learned is still relevant. Console, right line, enter the amount of the meal, which should be in quotes. Or if it's not a meal, I suppose we could do other tips too. Let's just do enter the amount, get rid of the rest. I've always thought it would be really useful to do, and maybe they exist, a broad tipping program, which is not just for restaurants, but I've never known what to tip a ballet in those times when I've had them, or what you're supposed to tip a, hotel, person that carries your stuff up. I forget what they call them. Bellboy, yeah, or what you're supposed to, there are lots of situations where you're supposed to tip in this country. And then if you go overseas, it's a very different mix yet. So if there was some vast tipping app that would tell you everything that you're supposed to do and best practices, like in Japan, it's insult to a tip. So, so you don't tip there. But a lot of countries do take tips. So anyway, now, if I wanted to, so amount is up there. we could, well, let's just do the things. I was going to do a try-parse here, but let's just keep it. Do you want to do a try-parse or you want to keep it simple? All right, we'll keep it simple. So amount equals double lowercase d console read line. Now, one of the things that I mentioned before, and it's really important, if you declare this a class scope, so way up here, you don't want to redeclare it down here. And what that means is if I do double amount, do you guys remember what happens? It doesn't throw an error. It's a brand new variable and it's only valid between these curly braces. So amount up here stays 0. So you don't want to redeclare it. The way that it does it, if it has two variables of the same name, it always goes for the one that has the more limited scope, right? So it favors the one that's here as opposed to the one that's at the. So it would assign the value to the one internally and not to the class value. So, and it's an easy mistake to just redeclare it here by putting the data type down there. Declaring it, I'm not sure if I ever said it simply, but declaring it always involves putting the data type, then the name, okay? So if you're doing this, you're just using it, you're not declaring it. That's actually all this method has to do, since we're not doing try-parse anything. Right, so it's just, once we've got the amount, it'll assign it to that variable up there.
Don't we have to tell it what to go to next?
We will. I'm going to do we will have to figure out how we're going to call these.
Okay.
Right now, yeah, this won't do anything because it's not being called. I'm going to do, so for a tip, why don't we have it return a double, right? Because a tip is going to be a %. And we want, so let's call it get tip %. This I'm vaguely unsure how to do this. It's underlined because it wants to return a double. If you want to get rid of the underline, you can do double tip % equals 0, return tip %. You don't actually have to do that, but it gets rid of the red line if they bother you. So this is a little bit, I mean, it's possible this could be broken up into more than one method. And one of the things that I want to tell you is that what belongs in a method is a little bit of a judgment call and a style call. It's not absolute, right? So generally a method should do only one thing. So I'm going to actually request the tip % in here. And we could make it like a little menu in here. And it could be like a separate little program. Do we just want to raw just say what the tip % is? Do you want to keep it simple or do you want to make it a little more complicated? Make it complicated? I have one vote for that.
Yeah, what does menu look like?
All right, well, let's do kind of a menu. We could do this. I'm going to do it in one method here, I think. But so we'll do console write line. Let's say choose your tip percent. And then I'm going to do a couple of other console write lines. So I'm just going to do a write. I'm just going to copy that. Uh, 2 for 15%. Uh, 3 for 20%. And we'll say 4 for other. Okay, and you could make this fancy if you want. You could put, stuff around it and all sorts of things. Then what we need to do is, so I'm going to make int choice, and I'm going to make it equal to 0 also. And the choice is going to be for the menu choice. So choice equals int parse console read line. Can't type at all. All right. And then what we need to do is some ifs or a switch. Let's do a switch just because we haven't done many of those. It would work either way. You could do if statements. Do they call it switch? And then I'm going to do choice. This is going to be, so I told you a thing can be, parentheses around that. So case 1, and we got tip percent. So tip percent equals 0.01. All right, 10%. Break. Case 2, tip percent needs to have equals 0.15. Is it 01 or 1? 1. My brain is. And then break. Do you guys remember this form? I think we talked about it very briefly. The cases and switches. Case 3, tip percent is 0.2. And then
This switch you're talking about, this switch is the choice that you.
the switch is based on the choice.
Yeah, and then it corresponds.
Right. And this only works, like ifs are much better. It doesn't work very well if there's any kind of range, right? It only works if you're dealing with very discrete values. Switches are good because there's no case greater than 1 or case, it's always a specific value. So cases aren't any good if you're looking for a range of things. Then you have to use ifs. And then the last one is the case 4 is other. So if it's other, then what we have to do is say console write line. Enter your tip, right? What do we want to say? Your alternate tip. And we'd say tip percent equals double parse console read line. And I'll show you this when it's done. And then we would do a break. What is it not like? Oh, I didn't do that full. And then I'm going to do default. And we'll just do a console write line. Just say not a valid choice or something. Now, there's all sorts of things we could do to make this much more sophisticated, but I will refrain. If you're going to do this, and then we need a break, you could loop this, right? So that they could choose. It won't. You could loop it so that it won't go on until they do a valid choice and things like that. But we'll just leave it as is. All right, so tip percent at this point is going to be assigned one of these values, right? Or it's actually, if it's not a valid choice, not only should we break, but we should probably, can we return in there? I guess it'll go a forward, but tip percent will be 0. We should do something so that if it's not a valid choice, again, it makes sense to loop back up.
Would you just put the call for the percentage?
What I would do is I'd probably put this whole thing in a loop, a while loop. We could do that after. We could come back and make it fancier. So the thing is, this get tip percent is actually kind of a complicated method. It has a lot in it, but it's really only doing one thing. It's just assigning a value to tip percent. So you could argue, and if you wanted to get more elegant, you could put that menu in another method and call it from within to get the tip percent. I mean, you could break it up more, but you could argue that it's a valid method because it's only doing one thing. I'm not going to worry for a while about what you would call elegance, in terms, but just the idea of breaking things up into what are relatively decent chunks. Questions on this, on the switch and the thing? So that gets the tip percent. Then we need to basically get the tax percent. And I'm just going to take it as a straight, just have them enter the tax percent. If you had a sophisticated program, it could go look it up, right? Where are you? What are the tax rates here? Particularly on a phone app where you have GPS, there are tables. I mean, it's amazing what things it can look up. But let's just enter it. So let's do, again, I'm going to do a double. There's one other thing we should do with this percent. What happens, how are they going to enter this? Are they going to enter it as 0.0? Say they want to do a 25% tip. More likely they want to do a 5%, but 0.25. Are they going to enter it that way? Probably not. They'll probably enter it as 25. So we should make sure if, now this has a couple, if tip percent greater than, would anybody do 100% tip? That's a question I always have when I do this, because if this negates 100% tip or beyond. Actually, it allows 100%. It won't allow it more than 100% tip. Because I know people do. I was in my daughter owns a restaurant, and somebody tipped. They had a $30 meal, and they tipped 100. I don't know why they were tipping 100. Usually that happens when you drink too much, but and they don't serve alcohol. So yeah, it'd be really rare that they would do 100%.
They probably wouldn't be using a tip calculator.
If they were doing 100% tip, that's true. So we're going to just say if the tip is greater than 1, which allows a tip. Okay, so I did miss that. Then what we're going to do is tip percent. Now you can do this a couple of ways. You could do divide equal by 100. You know what that does? Actually, it's equal divide probably. But let's do it. Equals tip percent divided by 100. Why does it not like 100?
Is it the wrong symbol?
I think it's that.
I just did it the wrong way. There we go. Too many DOS prompts lately. Okay, so that, I mean, when you're doing these, as I said, one of the things we'll work on later after you get more sophisticated is trying to manage all the weirdnesses that can come in by allowing people to enter data. One of the rules for database development, basically when you're creating forms, is that you should never allow open text boxes if you can avoid them. Yeah, drop-down lists, radio buttons, check boxes, whatever you can do. You can't avoid them all, obviously. You can't predict their name. You have to let them enter. But a text box is always an avenue for attack or just bad information.
What if they put a percent sign?
That's, that's going to fail here.
Yeah.
So,
Is there any way around that?
well, you'd probably want to do a try parse. And you could also, so a try parse would catch that. You could also, and I'm not going to go there now because it's a whole new set of tools. So notice that it looks like somebody was doing it. You could get it as a string rather than as a double. And then you could do some string functions to extract any numbers and remove any other characters. I think I would probably just do a try parse and say, if it fails, well, make sure you didn't enter a percent sign, make sure, But actually, that's a good question because they could do that. It allows them to enter a decimal, but they're probably going to enter a whole number. Is it making sense, sort of? We're getting caught up in, the methods are the most important thing right now, that the fact that we're breaking it into methods. And then right now, this program, if you ran it, would do nothing, right? It just flash and be gone because we haven't called any of these methods. One of the most important things about when you break it up in a method is a method never executes unless it's explicitly called. So you have to, right now is this program would literally, in fact, we could do it, build errors. Oh, that's because I have the double hanging out there. If I were to run it, it would just flash and be gone. All right, so I'm going to do, this is for the tax, double get tax, percent. No semicolon there. So basically we would want to do like console, right line, enter the tax percent. And we could do like double tax percent equals double parse this has all the problems of the self-entry for the thing. So I'm going to do also if now tax percent surely should not be over 100%, at least not in our country yet. And basically, I'm just going to say tax percent which is, this says exactly the same thing as what's up here. Tip percent equals tip percent divided by 100. This says exactly the same thing. Slightly less typing, but it may be less clear. And that's something you should think about when you know, this is like plus equal or times equal, which we used before. You can do divide equal. So basically this is, it means tax percent equals tax percent divided by 100. And remember, those obviously those aren't equal to each other. The equal here is used just as an assignment. You're assigning a new value to tax percent. And then what we will do is we'll return tax percent. So questions on that one? You didn't know there was so much in writing a tip thing, huh? You look like you had a question, did you? I will, of course, post this and comment it. But
Yeah, I'm getting an error with the initial get tax percent. It's saying that not all code paths are different values.
do you have a return at the bottom?
Yes.
Is there anything after it?
No. I just realized that I did not do the bracket, but it's not.
Oh, okay. Yeah, a lot of errors. And I do this too. You look at the logic until you go blind and there's nothing wrong with the logic. It's almost always like a curly brace out of place or a missing semicolon. You know. But it doesn't return that as an error generally. You know, it returns a logic error because it doesn't know where your block should begin and end. But it knows that every open curly brace should have a closing curly brace. All right, so we've done all of the input stuff. All of these things are for input. So let's do the calculations. Are you guys ready? All right. It's not you, it's me. As I said, I haven't had my coffee either. Okay, so I'm going to do a double again. And the different, so let's calculate tax first. Calculate tax. And there's one of the things to know about this too is that there are other ways to do it, right? There's other ways you could set this up. This is one way. Even within methods, like I made all of these things return things. I think that's actually makes sense when you're doing a calculation, but you could have made them void and had them pass the value too. I mean, that would work also. It's a whole different structure for it. I think this one's better, but the other would also work. So to calculate tax, I'm just going to do return amount, right? Because we made that global, times, and because it returns a value, I can actually use the method here. See, it's perfectly happy with that. I'm just calling the method get tax percent. And because that returns a double, it's perfectly happy here. It'll call the method. It'll actually, at this point, and this is a problem you have to watch for, is this is the point where you will enter the tax percent too. And once you've entered it, it will assign it here, and then it'll do the calculation. So this is actually calling the method, which means actually inputting the value and getting it, right? And so this is, well, actually, this might be a problem. Because if I do this, if I call this method again, it'll go through the process again. Do you know what I mean? I was going to call it when I do the totals.
It'll request. It'll go back up to here.
Yes. So that may not be the way I want to do that. We could, I know a solution, but it kind of shortcuts what we were doing. We could just calculate the total. But we want to see all the different things, right? So
You can't access this right here.
what?
The return.
Yes, but the thing is that if I do this, what it's going to do is it's going to call this again. All right, so it's fine if I call it once, but then when I do the total at the end, if I call this, so if I call this method to get the percent, you know, what the total is for the tax, it's going to call this again because that's how it gets the total. So if I call this, it's going to call this, which is fine. But then if I do the total and call it again, which is what I think.
Assign something else to the amount times get tax percent and pass it down?
We could pass it. Why don't we do that? Why don't we calculate the tax and then we can pass it down? That would solve it. But it is something you may find yourself in where you accidentally call things twice, you know, that you don't want to. And I wasn't doing that as a plan. As I said, I need coffee. It just occurred to me that because my original thing was in the total, I would just return amount plus calculate tax plus, and it would have meant a double calling of the ones above it, and it would be. So we'll pass down the value. We could, if we want, should we make that void then? Let's make it void. I don't want to confuse you. That was not my point. So I am going to declare a variable, which will be double tax. We'll just say double tax. And then we'll pass that down when we have a method to pass it to. And I'm going to do void calculate tip, and we'll do the pass down in a minute. I'll fix that. I'm just going to say double tip equals amount times get tip percent. So let's calculate tip. This is a little bit weird, but let's do a double tax. And then we can call this by calculate. The trouble with this is that we're just passing calculate tip. We're just passing values through so that we have them at the end. I'm not real fond of doing that. This is tax, okay. That should be all right. What is it not like that? Did I spell it different? Yes, I did. Calcu. There we go. And then I'm going to do calculate total. And for that, I want double tax. This one makes more sense. Double total, or double tip. This one I could do. I'm trying to think this through in a way that makes more sense. If we pass them through, the trouble is that we keep having to pass more and more stuff. There's got to be a way to fix that. Anybody see it? Because you guys are probably as smart as I am. I'd like to do these as doubles. I mean, actually return the tax, but I don't want to do it where I have to call them. I know, I think I know. I'm going to go back. I'm just going to say return tax. I just have to be really careful only to call them once. Return tax. We'll make this also a double. And we will return this. I'm sorry. This is one of the things that, so this doesn't have to have this, but this is the only place I'm going to call those things. And I am going to do I want this to be, yeah, let's make that void. All right, so what I changed, I didn't make any change to the tax percent, so it was after that, right? So when we did calculate tax, I'm just going to return tax, right? I'm just going to, I made this double again, I'm going to return tax. And I made this double and I'm just going to return it. The problem is I can only call these once, right? So I just have to make sure that I only call them once. And I think it's easier than what we were starting to do, which is where I was going to have to keep passing variables that weren't being used in the method that I was taking them, right? Just to have them flow through. And that's so in the total, I can say I am going to do int tip equals calculate tip. So it'll give me that value and it'll launch that thing. Oh, it's double tip. Never mind. Oh, calculate tip doesn't need the tax anymore. Okay. And then I'm going to do double tax equals calculate tax. And double total equals amount times tip or plus tip. plus tip. I am actually doing the calculation on the raw amount, not the, why does it not like calculate tax? Calculate tax. What did I do for calculate tax? Spelling. Okay. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to display these. So I'm going to create a void display, and the display is going to take double amount. Actually, amount I don't have to get. So tip and double tax. And double total. So I'm only going to pass them from one place, from the place where I accumulate them. And I don't have to call, I can just use the variables. So I'm going to do display. Tip, comma, tax, comma, total. Does that make sense at all? Have I totally lost you? This should be
Yes,
lowercase. I totally lost you. As I said, I should have had coffee. So what we've done, let's walk through it. And maybe, I wish I could display the whole thing. You know, it's hard to when you only see pieces of it. Let's walk through it from the top. And then ask some questions. And then the very last thing is just going to be to display it. And it should work now, I think. So we declared the amount at the top, right? We still haven't called anything from main, so it still will flash. It just won't do anything yet. But we've got the, the amount there. So basically we broke it up. These are the steps that we have. We get the amount of the bill, we get the tip percent, we get the tax, we calculate the tax, we calculate the tips. We actually calculate the total. I should have probably said calculate again. And then display the amount, tax, and total. So there's where we get the amount. We just ask for the amount and we assign it to the variable. That's all that method does. The second one, we do the tip percent, and that's a little more complicated because we give them kind of a menu of choices. We tell them that they can do 10, 15, or 20, or other. So when they enter their choice, which we get from the console read line, then we do a switch to say what to do. If they choose 1, then we do a 10% tip. If it's 2, we do 15%. If it's 3, we do 20%. And if it's other, we ask them, what is that other going to be? So we do another console write line. Say, what is that tip going to be? And they enter it, and then we determine if it's a whole number that we probably want to make it into a decimal. That's pretty much what that does, right? All right, and if it's not 1 through 4, we just say it's not a valid choice. So when we do the tax percent, we're going to return the double. We ask them to enter the tax percent, and again, we check to make sure it's a decimal, basically. Does that make sense? And then we return the tax percent. The calculate tax, this is where things started to go bad, is it occurred to me that I could get into a loop that I didn't want, basically, where a method's getting called more than once, but I think I've handled it now. So I went back to the original form, which is to return the result as a double. So we're just going to calculate the tax and return. This calls the get tax percent, right? So this is where we will do that. The calculate tip, calls the tip percent and just takes it from the amount. Now, when we do call these, when we call calculate total, calls the calculate tip, calls the calculate tax, those in turn call the get tip and the get tax. So we don't want to call them more than once. The amount is based on these totals. When I pass the variables, I don't think there'll be a second call to the method. So I think we're safe doing that. And then in the display, I just need some console write lines to display this, right? So I'm going to just say console write line, your amount is and we'll just do amount. The tip is and we'll just do a tip because we passed it in. And so your tax is and tax and then let's do the total is, and I'm not being very careful with capitalization and stuff but with the text. And then the very last thing we probably should have is a method. And I think I put it in my toolbox. Well, I didn't actually. I'm going to just do a void posit and I'll just that's just the console read line. Press any key to exit in console read line. So we have quite a few methods. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 methods plus main. So where, what do you think you would call from main?
Get amount.
You would think so, except that, well, actually, I do think we do have to call get amount because it's not called anywhere else, right? So let's call get amount. So, and again, because main is static, we have to declare the rest of the program, the rest of the class, and do p.getAmount. And then I think we need to call I actually think total, calculate total. Because if you think about it, calculate total calls calculate tip, which calls get tip. Calculate tax calls calculate tax, which calls get tax. With the amount we've got. So I think all we have to do is call, and it also calls display. So I think the only thing else we need to call, two things we need to call. One is up in main, we'll do p dot calculate total, and then posit. Because calculate total calls everything except get amount and posit, right? Does that make sense? We could draw a picture of it. Sometimes that's useful. After we run it to see if it works. So let's see if it works. Okay, so we want to enter the amount. When you're testing things, it's good to do like 100 or something that's pretty simple to see if you're on the right track. So choose your tip percent. Well, let's do 3. Enter the tax percent. What is the tax percent in 9.8? Is it 5? 8? Whoa. Why it didn't seem to pause? Well, and restaurants have a higher tax than the regular sales tax.
Our 9.5 the last time I worked it on, the tax percent.
Why did it flash? It didn't give me an error, it just flashed away. Deposit. Deposit should have been called. So it should do the display. It was doing everything right. Why did it flash away? That's weird. This is, shouldn't have to do this. I'm just seeing if it, so enter the amount, 100. 3, tax percent, 8 or whatever. And then it works. But why did it, and then it says, press any key to exit. Why did it flash last time?
Do you have to repeat that?
I didn't, but I bet I have to do it twice. I don't think I need that. So enter the amount 100. Let's do 2 for 15. Tax percent. This time I'll say 9. And that looks like it's working. And then you could try something, if you wanted. So let's do 100 again. Let's do 4. And so I need to enter the alternate tip amount. So I'm going to be really generous. Tax percent, 8.2. And that worked. So it is working now. One of the things that you can really tell is that it's really crucial that you get the calls right, and that can be a problem. If you call them in the wrong order, things can get really confused real quickly. Do you guys want draw a picture of this? Okay, let me try. I'm going to open Visio. Or do you just want to whiteboard it? Visio is a diagramming program. Probably what I would do here, I'm going to go to software. I'm going to do an activity diagram. They're pretty close to a flowchart. Let's make it bigger, although it'd be hard to see all this on the screen too. So we have the starting point. And then the first thing that we did was call get amount, right? Get amount called get total, which is a little bit weird, but I'm going to do it in the order we actually call. You know what would be a better diagram? Let me try something. Don't know if I can do this. I'm going to try to do this. I just don't know if I remember. Where it is to get to. I may have to not. All right, it's going to take too long for me to remember how to do that, so I'll go back to the diagram. Visual Studio will diagram things for you. If you highlight it right, it'll actually create a diagram for you. So when we called, the next thing we actually called was get total, right? So I'm just going to do this in the order that we called them. Get total called, I wonder if there's a way to show, as I said, I was thinking there might be a better diagram for this, but get total called a few things. It called get tip percent. I'm going to try to do a little different. And then it called get tax percent. Okay, so I'm going to kind of split this. Again, I don't know that this will make sense either, because I think there's a slightly different diagram that would be better. So it called those two. And then tip percent, actually it called calculate tip percent, right? Let's do it right. And then calculate tip percent called get tip percent. And this one called get tax percent. Visio, if you've never played with it, is about as squirrely as a program can get. I'm going to do a join, because then when they kind of rejoin here, and then they call display results. This calls display results. Can I get that? I can maybe zoom it down a little bit. So kind of where we do in the start, we call get amount, and then we call get total. Get total did a couple of things. It called calculate tip percent and calculate tax percent. Calculate tip percent called get tip percent. Calculate tax percent called get tax percent. When all of that was done, it sent the results down to display results. I mean, it's not the greatest diagram in the world. Does it make it more sensible, though? I know it's hard to read because I made it small enough to fit on screen. What? Yeah, I meant this to be a little simpler than it ended up, actually, because of the, particularly with me restarting in the middle with a couple of changes. The point I want to make is breaking things up. 2 points. One is breaking things up. The other is just being careful how you call things, right? It sometimes is worth drawing a picture. It doesn't have to be in Visio. You know, of what, so if you make everything into its own method, then it becomes really important to know what order to call the methods. And if a method calls another method, you know, which is real common, so one method calls another method, you want to make sure you don't double call things. That's what caused me to pause in the middle, is that I was afraid I was going to be double calling things. Because if you double call things, it recalculates everything more than once, and you end up with an answer that doesn't make any sense anymore.
So amount in the bill and the total is.
Right, so we called get amount, right? So if you look at the actual code again, and I'll post this too, and maybe if I can get a better diagram, I'll do that too. If you look at what we did in main, we called get amount first, right? And that set the amount that we're basing all the taxes, everything on. And then we called calculate total, and that's simply because in calculate total, we call calculate tip, and we call calculate tax. Calculate tip calls get tip, right? And calculate tax calls get tax. So basically, when we call total, and it passes it all to display. When we call this, that's the whole program. This is really the method that summarizes everything that's going on in the whole program. That doesn't always happen. You know, depending on how you structure it, it could happen different ways. But basically, this method is, all the methods are basically focused on this one in the end. And then the only other thing we call is the deposit, right? To let it last long enough. There are other ways to structure it, but I would do it what makes sense to you. We'll do another, not today. This took longer than I wanted today, but we'll do another one. I'll pre-plan it more so that I know that I can drink coffee, so that we won't do the double take in the middle. I don't expect this to fit in, to sink in immediately. I don't, but play with it. And it's okay if you get a little lost. I can help disentangle things. Yeah. I think just to look at the assignments, the first one is not very hard, but the next one is a bit hard. And I think it'll take some work. So I wanted to go to Canvas. All right, so where are we? 6 or 7? 6. If we run out of time before the end too, I won't count, It's always possible I could cut the last assignment or so if we have to. So this is basically the gas mileage, and it's just breaking it up into methods. So just do your best you can, and I'll comment on them. Basically, the steps are the same. Input, output. You have to get in your input, right? How many miles, how much gas. Then you do your calculation, then you do your output. Almost every program is input, calculate, output. And that's true. Even the most incredibly complicated programs are usually just, input, output, and the calculations in between. It's just that they can be really complex inputs and really complex outputs and a lot of calculations in between. So this one I don't think is too hard. The next one, I think it's the next one. It might be it's actually almost the equivalent of a midterm. Nope, this is just the grades, the GPA one. That's not that hard. It's a little bit, but I mean, it's the same thing. It's just create a program with methods that calculates your GPA. We did that a little bit before without the methods, right? So hopefully the same code applies, you just have to break it up into methods. So that one's not terrible. So we're actually not terrible for a while. It must be 8. Yeah, 8 is the guessing game. And it kind of summarizes everything that you've done so far. So it has random numbers, it has loops. Ideally, you break it up into methods. And it's a stupid game. It's just 20 questions, right? So you get a random number. I say between 1 and 1,000 because the chance, you can actually mathematically, you can always guess it within about 9. If you follow a pattern. If you don't follow a pattern, you'll probably never do it. But you could do 1 to 100 if you wanted. And then you get 10 tries to guess the number. But each time you try a guess, it tells you you're too high or too low. Right? If it doesn't tell you that, you have no chance in the world. It tells you, so if you guess too high, it says you guess too high. If you guess too low, it tells you guess too low. And then if you get it, you get a point or so. It's, as I said, it's a stupid game, although I've been bored enough to play it. But it gives you some quite a bit of basically practice everything we've done up till now. And then I think we move into classes, into objects. So those are the 3 things that have to do with sense of method thing. We've got how many weeks left? 6, 5 weeks? So we might have to, I want to get to objects for sure, and I would like to do at least 1 form for you guys. So if I need to adjust the assignment list, because it is a bit extensive, we'll do what we need to do to get, there are topics I want to cover no matter what, so we might either do an assignment together in class, just to get it done, and then move on to one that's more interesting. We'll see. Questions? I'm going to give you the rest of the time. We also miss in that 5 weeks, I think the only day we miss is Thanksgiving. Veterans Day, but that's not us. Yeah, that's the other, that's Wednesday next week. It's Veterans Day. I will look at what's ahead versus the time and make some decisions. I was being ambitious, I think, when I did this little list. Yeah, I will come with it. Let me kill the video real quick, just so it